Hey, good afternoon. This is the 14 March update. It's part of our webinar series for OASIS Plus. Very excited to talk to everybody today because we have received the second draft RFP. And just as a disclaimer, before we dive in here, we know more changes are coming, possibly even today. But we're going to cover some information about what we know and what we're still waiting on today so that you've got the updated information, just in case you haven't had a chance to dive into all 2,221 changes between draft RFP number 1 and draft RFP number 2. So moving right along, it is March 14th, just a few days before St. Patrick's Day. My favorite St. Patrick's Day tradition is it's probably a toss-up between live music and wearing green. It's not a great color on me, but one day of the year I feel like I can pull it off. So I appreciate that day on the calendar. Things we're going to cover today, administrative updates. I am, of course, Rebecca Wayland. If you've watched any of these other videos, if you endured the pain of Polaris, you already know me. If you're new, welcome. I am Trident's GWAC lead, and I'm helping everybody navigate this process and trying to keep everybody up to date as best we can through this very dynamic challenge. So other administrative updates, we are updating a lot of the material on our OASIS Plus Information Hub. I've just figured out how to screen share as part of this webinar. So if you have not logged in yet, I want to show you how to do that real quick because there's a ton of good stuff just waiting for you in this library. And the whole idea is that you should be able to get some self-help here. So we are, of course, happy to answer the questions that you have. But when you're not chatting with us or if we're not available or if you're just doing this in your off time, what you can do is navigate to the Trident Proposal website. You'll have the option of logging in. Perhaps you can log in. We'll see if it lets us here. There we go. Okay. I am, of course, already a registered user. Your library will look a little bit different from mine. We do have FastProp that is available for sale. It's a self-paced proposal management course. But really what we're talking about today here is the OASIS Plus Information Hub. So you should be able to access that. And once you do, we have a ton of content in here divided out by section. So we've got just some general awareness. So this is all about how to look at FPDS and compare that record, how you're going to log into Symphony. We've got some trackers for you to use that we are updating based on the most current guidance and timeline. And then by volume, we have some specific information. So if you don't see something yet, it might be coming. Or if there's something that you would really like a guide for, we would love that feedback because we want to know what's helpful for you. And again, this is supposed to be sort of self-paced. So you can log on here, check out the guide. You don't have to talk to a human if you don't want to. All your references are in one place. Okay, heading back over to our deck. And Ada, if you can just give me a thumbs up if you are seeing the slideshow. I know we've started over at the beginning, but hopefully you can see the opportunity updates now. Perfect. Thank you for that thumbs up. Okay, so we've already talked about this a little bit, but major updates for you. GSA did release the second draft RFP on March 6th. On March 7th, they put out an updated scorecard, and on March 8th, they put out another updated scorecard. So please make sure if you're doing your self-assessment that you are using that March 8th scorecard. The previous versions had some incorrect totals. The math didn't quite work, and there's some clarifying language in this updated score sheet. We also got the first round of Q&A back, and GSA let us know that they're going to be releasing another installment of Q&A. They said before the next industry day. Well, the next industry day is tomorrow, so we are staying tuned hopefully today for some updated Q&A, but really it could be anytime in the next couple of days. So another big change, or not change, but update for you all is that the second draft RFP, there's a caveat. If you scroll into the notification that came out on interact.gov, this is an informational draft RFP. So I'm taking that to mean that this is kind of a courtesy preview of what the final is going to look like, because they're not soliciting questions, they're not soliciting feedback, there's no deadline for questions on this. This is really just hey, here's the next version. It incorporates all the changes. We're going to walk you through this at the industry day, but I think we should be staying tuned for a final RFP sooner rather than later. And in fact, in that same update, the final RFP they confirmed is expected in Q2 of 2023. If you're looking at the calendar, that's the end of this month. So we could be very close to a final solicitation. And so today we are just going to spend a couple minutes reviewing with you what you need to be doing right now, where your focus should be, on how you can best prepare yourself. So We know that there were more than 2,000 questions on that draft RFP. We got a couple hundred answers back on the first iteration. We'll go through some of the major game changers next. So where you're at and what you should be doing right now, make sure you're reviewing that second draft RFP. And I know that sounds like motherhood and apple pie, but there are so many nuances in there, and they made changes to the attachments as well as their solicitation itself. They provided this summary in the cover letter that came out with the draft RFP, basically saying we changed a lot of things. So they didn't include specifics in this cover letter, but it does clue you in on a couple places to look. So with the NICS strategy and the automatic relevance and things like that, there were changes to that attachment. Various areas of sections L and M, I love that phrase, but they did change some of the criteria, especially around what qualifies as an eligible project. I didn't see any threshold changes in terms of qualifying values, but there are updates to what's automatically relevant and then what you can get additional credits for. And by the way, I always call credits points. I use those two terms interchangeably, so I hope I'm not confusing anybody. Points is easier in my brain, but technically on the spreadsheet, those are credits. So if you hear me talk about credits, if you hear me talk about points, it's your score. They both contribute to that bottom line. And then we'll talk about through some of the specifics here with the subcontracting plan. And then they just changed a little bit of the language around how this is actually going to be administered on the contract side once it's awarded. So I know our focus right now is on preparation. If you're doing your due diligence, certainly take a look at those sections about how the contract is going to be executed and what's going to be expected of you as a vendor, because again, we want you to set yourself up for long-term success, right? The IDIQ award is not the end-all be-all goal. It's success on the contract over the long term. But just recognizing that everybody has competing priorities and other things that they're working on, certainly the alligator closest to the boat is confirming that you're still eligible and that your self-score is what you think it's going to be. So in that vein, one of the biggest changes that we saw is under the unrestricted second draft RFP, there's a lot of updated language in the subcontracting plan. So they did confirm that they will not accept master or commercial subcontracting plans in that section. If you are an other than small business, you need to submit a tailored OASIS Plus subcontracting plan. And they changed the goals as well. So originally, you saw that table on the left there, the percent of planned subcontracted dollars for small business was 23%. The goal has changed to 50% now. That's a huge increase. And there's some very interesting language around what GSA is expecting offerers or bidders to propose. They want you to make sure that you're proposing challenging but realistic goals. So if you're in a position and you can bid these numbers or these percents, right, where you've got 50% going to total small business and 7% going to small disadvantaged businesses or women-owned small businesses, then that's great. If you can't reasonably execute that, then you're going to need to propose goals as well as a rationale for why or how you have calibrated your goals the way that you have and why that's realistic for your situation. So that's definitely an area to watch. Other big changes under the eligible projects where they're describing the project type, OTAs were actually removed. They appeared in the first draft RFP. OTAs, the other transactional authorities, are not listed anymore in either the small business or the unrestricted draft RFP. And that's a pretty big shift. So I expect we're going to get some more information. I'm hoping we get more information either during the industry day or with the next batch of answers to questions, because I know a lot of industry was looking at that with a fine-tooth comb. The project verification form. This is actually a new form where there are additional fields. So this section of the form kind of encapsulates the major changes, and I just want to spend a couple minutes walking through this. So the first thing to note about this updated form, remember, this is your form that you're using to claim credit for anything not substantiated by contract award documentation or an FPDS record, right? So, or if there are errors in either of those things. This is the form that you fill out that gets signed and validated by whoever the end customer was, right? So if you are a subcontractor, that was your prime. The prime needs to submit or to sign this form. If you are the prime, your customer is the government. Or if it's a commercial project, then your commercial customer would be the person or the entity rather signing and validating the information that you put in here. So what you need to know about this is that if you have a project that qualifies in multiple domains, what they have listed here in the instructions is that you may use this form once for 2 domains. You just have to annotate the information specific to each domain in one location. So at a glance, GSA is going to be able to say, okay, you are aligning this project. You're claiming relevance to both management and advisory and technical and engineering. Here's your write-up of how it's relevant to management. Here's the write-up of how it's relevant to engineering. Here's the dollar value for management. Here's the dollar value for engineering. You're going to make sure you're not double dipping across funding and just taking the whole contract value into account if you are claiming relevance in multiple areas. Interestingly, they don't say that you shall use one form for each project. Right now, the language still says you may use one form. So this will certainly make it easier for offerers because you're not trying to complete multiple forms. But it does raise the question of, are we going to see stiffer language around this in the final draft RFP? And is it going to make the conversation harder or easier with your customers? It might depend on personality. From the organizational side of me likes having it all in one place. That way there's no room for error if you're trying to copy information from form to form, right? If you're documenting the total value, the period of performance, all those little administrative details, you just have to enter it once and it's done. But again, it does remove some of the wiggle room for the double dipping, which may or may not work in your favor. Okay, moving on to the next section of this form. This is a big change. The relevance proposed domain, where you can now include a narrative statement explaining how your project is directly relevant to each domain you're proposing it against. The catch here is that you only have 750 characters to do this. So if you take nothing else away from this, it's great that they basically gave us a short paragraph to be able to substantiate things, but your evidence still has to be Loctite. Because 750 characters, you can see it represented in that block. That's 750 characters, not including spaces. It's just not that much content. So you're still not really doing any exercises in creative writing here, right? There's still nothing that you can really stretch or misrepresent. And I would highly, highly encourage you to make sure that all of your statements of work or your PWS are very soundproof in how you've presented your evidence and your case, and very organized. So again, we don't want to just throw a lot at the government and hope that they can sort it out and figure it out, or maybe they'll just give up and say, okay, it's too hard, so points awarded. Like that's not the attitude to take here. You really want to make it very simple for an evaluator to see what domains you're proposing against. That's task number 1, is make sure they understand where you're trying to align things. And number 2, make sure they understand your rationale for thinking something qualifies. So make sure that when you're prepping your evidence, the standard that I like to use is making sure that somebody who's reading your documents, if you're not in the room with them, if they're not going to get any explanation from you, that they could read your comment, see your highlighted tag, and reach the exact same conclusion that you came to. And there's no room for misconception. So it's a tall order if you try to do all of that at the last minute. The next block that it has been added to this JP3 form is this relevant work meeting or exceeding the minimum qualifying project dollar threshold. So they want 2 pieces of information for each domain that you're proposing against, right? So the qualifying project's minimum average annual dollar value for each domain where relevance is claimed, and then the average annual dollar value of relevant work for each domain where the relevance is claimed. So I think we're going to see some samples. I would hope that they would release a sample so that they can show bidders exactly how they want to see that formulated. But I think this could be as simple as, if you're bidding in the research and development domain and the tech and engineering domain, you would say tech and engineering minimum annual dollar value is 500,000. Our average annual dollar value for relevant work is 750,000. Under R&D, it's 1 million. Our actual is 1.25 million. So we'll see if we get any additional clarification or guidance there. Another big change was under the teaming language. So previously, prime-sub relationships were expressly called out, but only in the small business IDIQ. This has been added to the unrestricted RFP, or draft RFP rather, second draft RFP, It used to just say CTAs and joint ventures. Now it does also include prime and sub as a subset of CTAs. And then with that subcontracting plan, though, just keep in mind, we already kind of covered this. If you're in the unrestricted track and you're not an other than small business, if you don't include that individual subcontracting plan, then that will derail your whole proposal. That is a pass-fail requirement. And there's a lot of guidance in the solicitation around what your subcontracting plans need to include. And then they're not going to be accepting the commercial and master subcontracting plans. And we've already kind of stomped this, but just so that you hear it again, right, at least 7 times of repetition before something sinks in, there were major scorecard changes, and you need to use the version from March 8th until we get the final, of course, then you'll want to use that version, but hopefully there's no changes. The biggest change was probably in the small business domains, where they removed the greenhouse gas points. Those used to be worth 2 points. So it was basically, actually on some domains, it was worth more than having a top secret facility clearance. So they've actually removed that from consideration in the small business realm and redistributed the points. And the area where we see the redistribution happening most commonly is under this additional factor of management and staffing. They used to have a cap of about 5 points, just on average for the domains, and now that's up to 7. So this is just one example of places where the points went, because the overall threshold did not change. 50 points is still the maximum, 36 points to qualify in the small business realm, 42 points in the unrestricted realm. So no changes to those yardsticks, just in how you get there. Okay, at this point, I don't see anybody else on, so we have been fielding questions. I will just give you a quick recap of some of the questions that have come in this week. A lot of questions around FAR Part 37 and the definition of services, and I probably also read this wrong the first time I read through it, so I was really happy to see the Q&A clarify this a little bit. There's some really funny language. Let me pull it up and read it to you around this. See. So one of the criteria for an eligible project is, it says it needs to be a contract or order for services as defined in FAR Part 37. And what GSA means by that is that the contract isn't necessarily something that has to be tied to Part 37. They're using the definition found in Part 37 of the FAR to define services. So if you have a contract or a project that you think is on the fence because you're delivering products and services, excuse me, the first place I would encourage you to look is actually the FPDS record, because in there's a section where the government has to say this is not IT products, or this is not considered an end product contract. And you might just have an easy button to reaffirm that the contract that you're presenting is in fact a service-based contract. Some of the other questions that we have fielded just relate to annual value. Just keep in mind that if you are trying to calculate your average annual value, if the work has been completed, if it's done and over with, then you only get credit for the funds that were actually obligated. And if you're working on a subcontract, you're not going to have an easy FPDS record to go verify, right? So you're going to have to submit invoices to show how much money actually got dispersed to your company, obligated to your company for the services that you rendered. If the project is ongoing, you can take credit for the total ceiling, but keep in mind, you're also going to have all of the option years counted. So as a math problem, if you're working with a longer period of performance and your ceiling, it hasn't risen proportionate to the extension in days of the contract, you're actually going to end up with a lower average annual value. So just watch your math on that. And we don't want anybody to, short circuit the rules or try to find a loophole. We just want to make sure you're calculating with the right values for those average annual values. And I think those were the big ones that we spent a lot of time on this week. I did want to mention one other thing as it relates to points around additional functional areas. This is a line item that's on a lot of the score sheets for the domains, and it'll say something to the effect of offeror receives additional credit if they can demonstrate performance in multiple functional domains as outlined on JP-5, which is the list of all the domains related to OASIS Plus, both planned and future, both current and future. And I don't think that list means that you're trying to correlate to the specific bullets within one section. So if you're looking at the tech and engineering section, you're not trying to find services that map to 3 of those tech and engineering bullets. You're trying to find a bullet under tech and engineering, a bullet under management and advisory, and a bullet under, say, intelligence services or research and development. That's the kind of functional area they're talking about until we hear otherwise from GSA. So that I don't know if that's going to help or hurt most people. Most contracts, if they're service-based, have some level of management to them. So usually looking in the management advisory domain for a program management type facet is a pretty easy win. The engineering category is very broad. So if you've got any kind of engineer, systems engineer, analyst, something like that, or designer, developer, you're probably going to be able to get something in that category. And then if you do have that analyst sort of side, it could fall under intelligence, it could fall under research and development. It just really depends on the nature of your services. Or the other way to look at it is if you're doing program management and it's whole scale, no kidding, program management, you might also include some facilities management or some logistics, right? If there's telecommunications support, if there's event planning, all of those things can be captured in other functional areas. So you have to think outside the box a little bit. It still has to be proven. You still have to tie it back to some piece of evidence, but don't get tunnel vision and think you're trying to check bullets off of a list because that's a representative list. It's not supposed to be an all-inclusive, these are the only definitions that apply. And if you look at those lists too, they're not all really distinct services. So there might be a lot of overlap, for example, in business process engineering and business consulting. If you are providing business consulting in the form of business process reengineering, that's not really 2 different services, right? So the whole reason that category exists as a line for credit is to show integrated experience. So it's not looking for, really focused intelligence service. It's looking for different types of services that integrate into that delivery. That's my read. So, okay, great. I'm going to stop recording. This is going to get posted to our OASIS Plus Information Hub. Ada, any questions before we close it out here? I know I didn't tell you I was going to call on you. I put you on the spot. Okay.
No questions.
No questions. Awesome. Well, please reach out to us if you have anything, if you're watching this, if something doesn't jive, doesn't sit well, if you're not sure what I'm saying, drop us a line. We're happy to help. Or check out our information hub. We might have a guide there posted for you. So, okay, more to follow. Good luck.